What now for Jim Harbaugh in the maize and blue? Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down Michigan football as the Wolverines come off one of their most triumphant victories in recent years. A complete annihilation of Notre Dame, but still looking to make its way. It might be a rare shot, but to get back into the Big Ten Eastern Division race. We got Von Lozon on the line from Maize and Brew. Join him and the rest of the staff there at SB Nation, breaking down Michigan athletics on a daily basis. Von, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me on. How you doing?
I'm doing just fine. Appreciate you jumping on board. And it's pretty intriguing to us to look at this Michigan football narrative that because of the results against Wisconsin and Penn State was continuing to play into that. The Penn State situation with a Ronnie Bell drop with about 2 minutes left, they could have tied the game. That especially hit home with me in regards to evaluating this program, just in regards to what do they have now, because I can't imagine coming back from that in regards to going to Happy Valley, white out, get down 21-0, show all that resiliency, despite all that narrative coming into the game, having to answer the questions about record against ranked teams on the road and against top 10 teams, and you fight that hard to get back. You got to face that crowd and that team and that defense. You get there and you blow it. To come back from that and play the game that they did against Notre Dame, I think it was pretty special.
You know, I thought it was special to see them come back from 21-0 like you had brought up against Penn State. I was at that game and watching them come back and have the fire on the sidelines for them. It seemed like every time that they got a defensive stop, their offense was ready to go. They were hyping each other up. They went out there. Shea Patterson was making some pretty nice plays. The wide receivers were finally getting into their groove. They were finally targeting their wide receivers, Nico Collins, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and Ronnie Bell, those guys. But yeah, to see that translate to the beatdown of Notre Dame this past Saturday, it was truly something to see, especially in the conditions, because over the last 5 years or so that Jim Harbaugh has been here at Michigan under these weird weather games haven't really performed all that well, most notably the Michigan State game in 2017. But both teams got to go through the weather and all those conditions considered. Michigan was opening up some holes for their running backs. The offensive line was finally starting to get their groove on. Running backs Hassan Haskins, Zach Charbonnet, True Wilson even got in and got a touchdown. Christian Turner, who has been relegated to fourth string, even got in, had a few nice runs there. So it seems like everything's starting to finally click here, and it all started, it seems like, with that second half against Penn State. They claim it started against Illinois with the run game, but overall as a team, as an entire unit, I think that second half of that Penn State game lit a fire under Jim Harbaugh, lit a fire under the entire team, and they're going to probably keep it rolling against a defensively weak team in Maryland this coming Saturday.
Yeah, so can you really put you cover the entire offense in regards to the upgrade, because we did have an offensive line coming into the season that we expected to be, with Wisconsin, the best in the Big Ten, a quarterback that has been likened to Fran Tarkenton and Russell Wilson coming from Ole Miss, and we didn't necessarily see that from him, but maybe in spurts, but a lot of careless lack of protection of the football has been most notably his undoing early in the season. And then just a running game that from the running back position was obliterated from a depth standpoint during the offseason. And you find this Hassan Haskins, who I first saw carry the ball against Illinois, didn't know who he was, but then I see him have a nice game against Illinois. I watched a lot of that game, and now he's turned into be a great 1-2 combination with Zach Charbonnet.
Yeah, he really has, and it's interesting. He comes in as a true freshman last year. He came in as a running back recruit from Missouri. He was a 3-star guy. They moved him to linebacker last year and then brought him back to the offensive side of the ball, probably because they needed a guy in the running back room. You already alluded to the depth chart kind of being dwindled down a little bit after last season. Karan Higdon, he graduated, went on to the NFL. Chris Evans was suspended by the team and is no longer with the team right now. He's working through some academic problems. It seems like he might be back next year. Omari Samuels also was kicked off the team due to an incident that he had in Ann Arbor, and he had since transferred as well. So yeah, it's good to see the running back room actually doing okay. And Charbonnet, you expected, he was a very highly touted recruit from California. You kind of expected him to be the go-to guy this season, but having redshirt freshman 3-star guy Hassan Haskins come in, moving over from linebacker, it's good to see them have an actual 1-2 punch at the running back position again.
Get Von Lozon on the line from Mason Brew, the SB Nation platform for Michigan athletics. Michigan with a date at College Park against Maryland coming up this Saturday. You can get my week 10. It would be week 10 this week. College football predictions down in the link below next to Voice of College Football Community. 57% against the spread. All right. So, Von, the Michigan defense really locked down on Notre Dame, and I expected this game to be razor close, razor tight. And I think from a talent evaluation standpoint, it should have been. And if anyone would have said this final score is going to be 45-14, I would have immediately said, well, I'm a bit surprised, but Notre Dame blew out Michigan because Michigan has to be demoralized after what happened at Penn State, and they took themselves out of any college football playoff talk. The Big Ten's gone. There are obvious technical ways in which they can play themselves back in, and Penn State and Ohio State can fall apart and lose 2 games and that whole deal, but it's just realistically not going to happen versus Notre Dame's playing for everything. They lost the 1 game, but it's a good loss. They can, run the table and win it. They've got all the motivation in the world, and it just didn't turn out that way. And then I watched the game play out, and just the Michigan defense did everything against Notre Dame that I would, again, have expected to be just a titanic battle, because Notre Dame's got the offensive line loaded with NFL players. They got Ian Book, who's been very efficient, very capable, not a dynamic elite quarterback, but very efficient in making the right reads, doing the right things. And when he breaks contain, he picks up first downs. They closed off all that against Notre Dame, and it was just, again, an impressive performance on that side of the ball.
Yeah, defensively, they've been pretty locked in for most of the season. The Wisconsin game being the obvious one where they let Jonathan Taylor run all over them. They couldn't stop him or Jack Cohn. So it was a struggle for them in that game, but defensively, they've been pretty right. The second half against Penn State being one of the better halves of the Jim Harbaugh era, they only gave up the 1 big play to KJ Hamler. Other than that, they locked down Sean Clifford and all the running backs that they have as well. But yeah, you're right. Defensively against Notre Dame, they're throwing in some different stuff that Don Brown doesn't usually do. They played some zone. Those crossing routes that have been the defense's big problem protecting or trying to stop, they're finally starting to lock in and play some zone and stop these crossing routes that killed them. Ohio State killed them with those last year. And early on, Middle Tennessee State actually did those crossing routes in that first game against them, and mainly executed to perfection, quite honestly. But now Don Brown's starting to actually make adjustments and do some things that he's not usually known for doing. Most of the time, the defense is man-to-man, hoping that the 6 or 7 guys that are rushing the quarterback can get to the quarterback before he throws and tries to make a play with a wide receiver one-on-one with a guy like Ambry Thomas or Lavert Hill or one of the other defensive backs. So it's actually good to see that Don Brown is mixing in some new little things here to try and stop offenses from defeating them the way that they had, especially late last year against Ohio State, and Florida had those successes as well. So it's definitely nice to see. It's a surprise to see as well.
Yeah, so we've got a Maryland game coming up on Saturday that doesn't appear that it should be a competitive game. The Terps, come out of the gate and they rip Syracuse by 43 points after an FCS win in which they scored a zillion points the week before. And this has been the Maryland narrative now for a few years under DJ Durkin at the time, and now, of course, Michael Loxley takes over, and somebody needs to let everyone know that they play football games after 2 weeks. So they beat Texas in 2 consecutive openers, and that second Texas team is a top 10 team that wins a Sugar Bowl, and then they come out against Syracuse, and of course now Syracuse has turned out not to be the team that they were last year, but still 63-20. They finally seem to get a quarterback in play, and Josh Jackson, the transfer for Virginia Tech. The Terps have struggled at quarterback with injuries and just poor play forever. And he plays well for a few weeks. They lose to Temple, then they completely run off the rails, and now losing to everyone in the Big Ten, 52-10 against Minnesota last week. And they've recruited well, relatively speaking, to what their status has been in the Big Ten. They've had some top 25 classes in recent years, and you see those spurts of speed and athleticism with guys like Anthony McFarland in the backfield and Javon Leake and so forth. But unless they catch something in a bottle in the next 3 or 4 days, this should be, and with the renewed confidence of the Michigan football team, this again just plays into another blowout.
Well, that's what you would imagine, given how Michigan's finally starting to play some offense here, and with their offensive line and running backs, like we've already talked about. But yeah, defensively, it's just been a mess for Maryland this year. They've given up more than 50 points to Penn State, gave up a ton of points to Purdue. It's been a struggle. It's been a mess for Maryland's defense. They got a few guys. Their linebacking core is actually really nice. I like those guys in the linebacking room, but the secondary defensive line hasn't really impressed me all that much. If Shea Patterson can make the right, proper reads, like he's actually been doing with that second half against Penn State and this entire game against Notre Dame, he made, for the most part, the right reads. If he can lock in with those reads and make the proper throws, make accurate passes, I think the spread's around 20.5 points right now. If all of that lines up for Michigan the way that it has been the last few weeks, I think they should be able to cover that spread. I think they should be able to win by 3 touchdowns or more.
Yeah, I would be on board with that unless there's some kind of crazy backdoor cover that, can always come into play when you're winning by a zillion points late in the fourth quarter, and you don't know who's going to be on the field at that point, if the coaches just want to get on the bus and get out of town, or if they want to put down the throttle, or what the motivations are on either side. But yeah, I like Michigan in a comfortable fashion. You mentioned the linebacking there for Maryland. Antoine Brooks has been one of the better linebackers in the Big Ten for a few years now. He's second on the team in tackles, and Keandre Jones is making most of those plays behind the line of scrimmage with 10 tackles for loss and 6 sacks. So to get to the psyche of the team and then try to transition that to the fan base, I got to think there's a level of joy that comes from beating one of the main rivals in a blowout fashion, getting the monkey off the back to a certain extent, but a level of frustration to say, where was this team before? And we can't really win anything at this point. So what's the goal? Is it a New Year's Six game? What is being talked about amongst most of the fan base, because you've got your outliers, of course, but for most of the logical ones, what's the thought about where Jim Harbaugh has this program headed?
Well, where the program is headed definitely isn't, up to this point, it's not where fans want it to be. Even the logical fans, it's not where it's supposed to be, at least where the media narrative had it. When he first came into town, people were saying, oh, they're going to immediately compete for Big Ten championships and things along those lines. My first prediction for his first season in Ann Arbor, I said they're going to go 6-6. With the talent that they have, it's going to be a little bit of an adjustment period, but then they went out, won 10 games, won a big bowl game. So I was shocked that they were able to do that so quick. And then obviously the next season they came up a few inches short of a Big Ten championship appearance in Indianapolis, and things kind of spiraled down in the 2017 season when Wilton Speight got injured. I would say most fans are still relatively happy with where things are at right now. The fans that want Jim Harbaugh out of town are probably the same fans that wanted Lloyd Carr out of town back when everything was going on with the program then, even though the program was still in relatively good hands. And we all know what happened after Lloyd Carr retired. Not many good things. So I think the Notre Dame game, it was still important for them to win that game. Simply because they had a lot of big-time recruits on campus that weekend in just this 2020 class and future 2021 classes as well. It's still, it's still going to be win every game, beat your rivals, try to make the best bowl game that you possibly can. The Big Ten East Championship is kind of out at this point. So you still got a lot to fight for, the recruiting aspect of everything, beating your rivals, trying to make a good bowl game, and just trying to have momentum going into the next season, because they haven't had that momentum going into future seasons since that first bowl game that they won against Florida in the Citrus Bowl. It's been a while.
Vaughn, I remind people on a regular basis concerning Michigan football and the criticism of Jim Harbaugh. And this doesn't make an excuse for the other showings against Ohio State and a few against Michigan State and other teams. But that 2016 game in Columbus, obviously, Jim Harbaugh cannot control a measurement. The measurement goes the other way. They win the game. The game's over. They go to the Big Ten championship game. We don't know if they would have won, but they would have been a substantial favorite. So most likely they're in the college football playoff. And then who knows what happens after that. And even if everything else plays out exactly the same, they go 8-5 the next year, they do what they did last year, there's at least, okay, he did that a few years ago. Most likely that would have catapulted into some different results after that we can only conjecture about. But, those are the things that can't be controlled on a football field. He can't control everything. He's upgraded the program in regards to talent, recruiting base, results on the field are obviously much better than they had been going back to the 2004 to 6 range when they were competing for Big Ten championships. Right, Vaughn, appreciate you stopping by. Anything else for us, either on Maryland or this Michigan narrative?
No, I think we've pretty much covered it all. I appreciate you having me on, and go Blue.